everybody. So there's a few confused faces in the room. Hopefully you've all worked out that lunch has been delayed slightly and James and I are not it. But we will try and give you a bit of food for thought while you're waiting for some actual food. As Martina said, I'm head of Agile practice and I lead the team of Scrum Masters at New Voice Media. Many of them have been involved in organising or speaking at this conference, so today's a very proud day for me and I'd like to thank them. I'd like to hand over to James now, who's going to introduce us to our talk, Lean into Lean Agile Leadership.
Thanks, Melisa. And actually, I really liked something that Alex did earlier with Brigitte when you stood up and you kind of said what you were passionate about. And it made me think, like you said, I've been here for quite a long time, like 20 years, don't tell anyone. I think my passion is the kind of the culture. I really see the DNA in the culture that we've got today, right back from those days. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud about. So hopefully a lot of that will come out in these slides here. I did ask Melisa what her passion was. She said gin, basically. So.
And dogs.
So thankfully, I don't need to tell you what New Voice Media does and Vonage does, because Alan did a great job earlier. So yeah, we're trying to help customers move their communications up to the cloud. Kind of digital transformation, you could call it. You know, it's a big thing of our times. The world's becoming increasingly digital. It's a lot of change. You could take it all the way back to like the 70s, the revolution in personal computing, really, mainframes to desktop computing. We can suddenly start programming. We've got access to power that we never had before. The internet came along, revolutionized our access to information. It's all been distributed. I mean, don't get me started on things like blockchain. I think they're going to completely change the world. You know, technology is changing. We need to change with it. Your competition is changing. You're no longer judged, like Alan was saying earlier on, by your direct competitors. If you've got a web app, you're being judged by people in a completely different industry based on experience. Google and Facebook, they weren't even here when I was growing up. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they didn't even exist. Now they're the biggest companies in the world. They've transformed marketing, advertising. Social media didn't even exist. And you look at things like, you know, who'd go into retail these days when your competition is Amazon? Who'd start a taxi company when you've got Uber out there? So digital transformation's everywhere. It's attacking every industry. It's going to change the way that we work. And I kind of have this theory that we're all gradually becoming software companies. You know, finance, 40% of jobs have been automated. Of course they are. The data companies, computers are really good at doing that kind of stuff. Humans aren't. Humans are good at creativity. You know, algorithms, artificial intelligence, machine learning. I mean, self-driving cars. I mean, seriously, self-driving cars. When I was growing up, before we had emails and mobile phones and stuff, you know, we had the Hoff with a self-driving car. And like, that's reality now. I mean, how did that happen? Can you imagine the technology that makes a car drive by itself? And it's not just like Tesla, which is a technology company that's learned how to somehow, you know, stick it on some wheels. Ford, BMW, Volvo, these traditional automotive manufacturers, they're doing the same stuff. They're investing billions in R&D. So even these traditional manufacturing companies are becoming software companies. So this kind of tenuous thought we've got that we're all becoming software companies, we have to change the way we're thinking about management and leadership, because software companies are different. We attract a different kind of mindset. You know, the education, our expectations, our motivations are probably different. A lot of management was about kind of productivity, managing for productivity. We need to change this now to manage for creativity. So traditional management is going to have to change. I think they're going to have to understand that they're moving into software. They need to understand how software is built. And this is an Agile conference, so how do we build software? Well, it's all these words. And thankfully, I don't have to introduce most of these because the talks earlier on have already mentioned it all, which is great. But do we all have the same understanding of what Agile is? I mean, like Kevin was saying, it's kind of a framework, the guidelines and principles that we can mold to our own conditions so they work for us. And that works great, you know, within these teams. I think Agile is brilliant for getting a little bunch of, you know, 6 or 7 guys all pointing in the same direction and building great stuff. But what do you do now in an increasingly complex world where you've got dependencies outside of your team? Now we've got, you know, Kevin says 15, 16 feature teams inside of New Voice Media, plus all of Tony's ops teams. Those dependencies, how do we get everyone collaborating together? And this is really why I think Brigitte and Alex were talking about scaling Agile earlier on, because this is the next challenge. It's not just making a small group of 6 or 7 guys work together, get clear direction. It's getting everyone pointing in the same direction. And yeah, I don't even need to introduce stuff like SAFe or the Spotify model or anything now, because we had a great talk about that stuff earlier on. We use a lot of SAFe ourselves, and we'll talk about some of the things we've taken out of SAFe to help us scale our Agile print. But Taking it out of all of those terms and the buzzwords, Agile at its core is about these Agile principles, which I'm sure you've all seen and read. It's an Agile conference. I'm not going to pick on anyone, Tony, about how many there are or what's your favourite one. I was going to, but apparently I talk too much and I'm going to run out of time. So we're just going to whiz straight through. There's 12 of them. If you can read them all, nice job. But what we're going to try and do is put them into themes, basically, that we think leaders and managers would be interested in. And the same themes that we've heard in all of the talks so far today: collaboration, communication, predictability, motivation. And the basic premise of this talk is to see if we can look at these Agile principles, specifically regards leadership, management, and see if these principles are universal, not to just building software, but to building, the companies of the future, the Agile business transformation that we're looking for in the future. There's only 4 or 5 of them that actually mention development or software per se. So we've kind of crossed out those words where we see them, so hopefully they're going to be general. And they were written 20 years ago, like Alex was saying, so are they still valid? Do they still hold water? So I'm going to pick one. I've called it strategy. Business people and, developers must work together daily throughout the project. And I guess I've picked this one first because this is me. I'm the product owner. I look after the product owners. In the classic Scrum kind of model, you've got your engineers and you've got the product owner who's working with them daily. I represent the business, the strategy, the vision, the market. I'm the one that's getting it in the neck from the customers and support. I'm the one that's helping decide what to do next. I'm making sure, hopefully, that I can answer the questions from the team so that we collectively build the right stuff, we fix the right stuff. We're not spinning our wheels doing work that's not productive, that's not meaningful. It's stuff that's helping us meet that business desire. So taking it outside of development and the product owner, this is really what all managers need to be doing, we're thinking. It's providing that direct line of sight to be that link between our people, the business, the strategy, the vision. So we all know why we're getting out of bed and coming into work in the morning. Who's our end user? How do we contribute? How can we make their daily work meaningful? So that's kind of the plan. We're going to go through each of these principles, see if they still hold water. There's 12 of them, so, wish us luck. One of the things we were going to say, actually, OKRs, because nobody's mentioned it, it's one of the few things that hasn't been mentioned so far today. We use these objectives and key results to try and do this same thing. The objectivity, from Alan, right at the top, the objectives of the business. Then we, as the managers, we can try and translate these into the key results that we can manage, the metrics that we want to manage. But it's about that same thing, that line of sight. And you, as a manager, you have to keep up. We got acquired by Vonage. Our language changed overnight. Our competitors changed overnight. We were hearing new words, new functions that we didn't know. And that's a scary place for our guys. That's where we need to step in as the leaders, as the managers. We have to try and make the future not a scary place. But we have to keep up. We have to, if you're being that direct line of sight, you have a responsibility to understand what is important for the business and give that direction. Okay, Melisa, you're next.
So this slide is, I've called it motivation, building projects around motivated individuals. And everything's on the slide there, really. We need to give them the environment they need, the support they need, and just trust them to get the job done. Sounds simple, right? But let's dig into it a little. What actually motivates you? Money, right? So money is important. It's the, So various studies have found that higher pay and bonuses have actually resulted in improved performance, but only when the tasks involved are kind of simple mechanical skills. When we're dealing with skills that involve cognitive skills or decision-making, creativity, higher pay actually results in lower performance. So 1959, Peter Drucker, who was mentioned earlier in Alex and Brigitte's talk, he coined the phrase knowledge worker to differentiate from those people who are working on the assembly lines to those people who are being paid for their intellectual rather than their physical labour. And most leaders in software companies today are dealing with teams of these knowledge workers, people who know more about the work they're doing than their managers do. So as leaders, we need to make sure that people are being paid adequately so they're not worried about basic needs. And importantly, they need to feel that they're being paid fairly for the work they do. Dan Pink, in his book Drive, which has also been mentioned today, he describes this as enough to take money off the table. So once we've taken money off the table, Pink has this model with 3 influencing factors for motivation of knowledge workers. Again, Alex and Brigitte have kind of spoken about these, so I can move through them quite quickly. But from a leadership perspective, autonomy is really about providing teams of people with problems to solve, not solutions to implement. And it also talks to, as Kevin was saying earlier on, about giving people the autonomy to decide on the ways that work best for their teams and not dictating that to them. As leaders, we do have some requirements for information so that we can broadcast the health of our teams to the wider organisation. But after that, we pretty much leave it up to the individuals. And finally, we need to think about decision-making and devolving that down towards the people making the decisions. Now, I'm not suggesting we devolve all decisions, because that would be chaos. But we can make a distinction between strategic decisions, which are usually made infrequently, have long-lasting results, and result in significant economies of scale, and everything else. And it's this everything else bucket that we need to think about devolving. The second aspect of Pink's model is mastery, and this is really about improving skills. So engineers and technologists love playing with the new technologies, the latest things, and we need to ensure that we're providing adequate training to allow them to make the most of these opportunities. It's really about creating a learning environment where learning is embedded in people's everyday lives. It's not just relegated to the evening and the weekends. And the final aspect of Pink's model is purpose, and this is about providing meaning for people in the work that they do. And James has spoke about this a little bit in terms of the line of sight from the strategy of the business down to people's daily work. But it's also about visibly showing people the outcome of what they do, how it's changing people's lives. Now, all of this really, to me, sounds like running your own business. When you run your own business, you don't clock in at 9 o'clock, do some tasks, leave at 5, regardless of how far you've got. When you run your own business, you care deeply about your customer, and you're creative in figuring out the best and most efficient ways to solve their problems. When you run your own business, you go that extra mile to ensure that your customers are happy. And this is what we as leaders should be aspiring to. We should be engaging our people on this journey of our companies towards success. We need to really focus on making the company feel like their company. Clicker not working. So the second principle here, I've termed it around communication. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information is face-to-face. This is an interesting one. I don't disagree. Face-to-face is really important. And a lot of the information that we convey when we're communicating is in non-verbals. But we need to face the reality that increasingly we're working in global organizations and working with distributed teams. Things like climate change are really having an effect on how people feel towards travelling and commuting, as is the amount of traffic on our roads. And as managers, when we're recruiting, we need to sometimes go outside of the local area of our businesses to find the best people for the roles. And as we've mentioned before, these Agile principles were written 20 years ago. So video conferencing communication has come on a long way. It's what Vonage is all about, improving communication through technology. But communication isn't just about the technologies that we use. Stan Beecham is a sports psychologist, and he's done some coaching recently at Vonage. He came to see us recently and shared some ideas which I think speak to the intent with which we approach communication. And the first one is open-mindedness. And to me, this is a really essential ingredient of great communication. As leaders, we need to avoid this belief that we have all the answers. We really don't. What we need to do is create an environment where people can come to us with their ideas. And when they do, we need to truly listen to what they're saying to get the greatest benefit. The second topic that Stan spoke about was disagreeable. Now, I don't mean that we should be disagreeable people, but that we should be brave enough to disagree. And let's face it, it takes courage to disagree, especially with your boss. And again, as leaders, it's about creating an environment where we encourage different points of view and where people are not afraid to speak their minds and suggest alternative ideas. The more ideas we have to work with, the more likely we are to find the right one. But of course, we can't afford to spend hours trying to come to a consensus that everybody agrees with. And as leaders, sometimes we need to disagree but commit and unite behind communicating the message so the rest of the organisation knows which path to follow. The final topic that Stan spoke about was emotional stability. And Brigitte was talking about being willing to have emotions earlier on. Everybody brings their emotions to work. And believe it or not, leaders are people too. But we have a responsibility to check our emotions and make sure that they're not influencing our judgment incorrectly. So raise your hand if you've ever worked for a boss who's unpredictable, who can fly off the handle at a moment's notice. Wow. Comes into the office, big black cloud over their heads. Yeah, me too. When you're a leader, this type of emotional turmoil has a massive negative effect on a very broad range of people. The result is that people stay quiet, they keep their heads down, they're not bringing their great ideas to the table. So emotional intelligence is a really important skill for everybody in the workforce, but it's a really essential skill for leaders. So finally, I think we need to recognize that communication is about building those relationships that our companies rely on to succeed. So we do value face-to-face communication, but what we really value is high-quality, honest communication, using whatever channels are most appropriate for our needs.
Fabulous. It's good stuff. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about, this has been mentioned loads of times, collaboration. It's like how we get things done. Self-organising teams is the bit I've picked out at the bottom down here, and this is probably the one I hear the most from my developers. You know, I'm a self-organising, don't tell me what to do, man. People apparently don't like being told what to do. They like the autonomy. And especially because they are knowledge workers, and let's face it, I can't write a single line of code, so they probably do know a bit more than I do. So, you know. What's it mean, though, for leaders? Like, how do we get anything done? Apparently nobody cares what we think anymore. It's been devolved downwards. There's a chap, Robert Quinn, I can't even remember the name of his book, but he talks about leaders that have got this kind of mental map where they look down at the organisation and it's top down, it's hierarchical. And the primary motivation of people is fear, you know, it's like self-interest. And yeah, I think we've all recognised those places where you work, and there are execs who've got their own targets, their own bonuses. They're competing almost for airtime in meetings. They're competing for the respect and the reward that they can take away from their peers. I mean, that's not collaboration. That's not the conditions we can collectively get behind, like the customer. So we can change that. We can have a different mental model. You know, we can try and create environments where we're serving a larger purpose. And you have to if you're going to get into software, because the science is proven. The best software is built in those environments where the networks are fluid, where we aren't putting our little silos with our own little tasks. Okay, so self-organising teams is brilliant. Agile, I say, it's great when you've got 6 or 7 guys in one little office somewhere. They're all working together, great high bandwidth communication, face-to-face. It's complex software. It's increasingly complex. We're finding that we're having to silo really around components. But I want to get something built. I need to work with other teams. You know, I've got to speak with the DBAs. How do we make sure that when I hand off my piece of work to the DBA, it's as important for him as it is for me? So I think this kind of collaboration is one of the big things for leaders. We've got to create the conditions where people can come together, can work, we can devolve power, and let people solve problems for themselves. We can look at some of the things like the processes and the tooling, you know, the language. We're now part of the Vonage group. We have to work with people in different parts of their business. And guess what? They're all excellent software engineers too, with their own culture that we don't quite understand. But we can try and help break down some of those barriers, you know, use the same tooling, the same words, understand we say a sprint is yours 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. We can lose a lot in translation if we're not careful. We're going to talk about one of the things that we do at New Voice Media, a collaboration. I think this is excellent.
So this is PI planning. Brigitte and Alex were again speaking about this earlier. 4 times a year, we fly everybody into our head office in Basingstoke in the UK. It's a massive investment, but it's so valuable to break down those barriers between people. We get everyone in the same room. We give them a priority list, which described what the business thinks is important to build. And then we simply ask them to build a plan. Because we do this 4 times a year, we're only asking them to think 3 months ahead. And that's a reasonable timescale to kind of really analyse how much work the teams think they can achieve. And because they're in the same room, it's really easy to resolve blockers. Just go and have a conversation with somebody. And scheduling work becomes simpler because if you've got a dependency on another team, you can have a conversation and put something on their plan right there. And what happens is that our teams come together and they solve problems collectively. And the other advantage is it's impossible to ignore. This photograph shows that we literally just take over the canteen for about a week. So everybody in our organisation is kind of forced to sit and eat their lunch with our plans right up on the wall. And that leads to some really interesting conversations with people who may not be immediately affected, but will eventually be involved in the planning that we're doing.
Is that me? Boom. Okay, so yeah, that collaboration stuff. The most important thing about that big room planning is all of the work and the effort that goes in before it. One of our RTs, Bridget's one of our RTs, and Martin said something the other day which I thought was great. People walk in and they think it's like a wedding. You know, it was all done out like, you know, Game of Thrones or The Spring, or whatever it was. You know, all the effort that people put in. They don't see, like in a wedding, the months of effort they've gone in beforehand to try and have the conversations about producing a single prioritised list to get everyone in agreement about what we need to work on first. So this one, yeah, we've said it's about prioritisation. Simplicity is essential. Work not done saying no, and saying no is hard. Nobody likes to hear no. But what do we say no to? And if we're serious about devolving power downwards, how do we let our guys understand what to say no to? You know, how do we give them that direct line of sight to the business priorities? So this is all great. We can learn how to make decisions and what the priorities are. And, yeah, but what if the problem is not there? It's upstairs. It's the leaders. You know, the phrase of a hippo, the highest paid person's opinion. Alan has just left the room there, but I literally hear people saying Alan's promised this to a customer. And if you've got a herd of hippos, it's even worse. You know, there's tons of them all now. They all think theirs is the biggest. You know, I want this one, I want that one. Mine's more important. So how do we try and tackle all of that? Create this environment where the best idea wins. So one of the things we've taken, it's a big part of the SAFE framework. I've written down the name of the guy who did it, Donald Reinerstein, apparently. I just don't read enough books. But it's quite simple. It's just a way of kind of sequencing jobs and taking a lot of that emotional kind of like conversation out. It's quite messy having an argument with somebody who thinks their thing's really, really important. And the basic premise is we look at this thing, the cost of delay. And we work that out mathematically. We try and get everybody to relatively size different pieces of work based on things like the business value or the time criticality or, you know, the risk to the business of not doing this piece of work. And that comes out with a number. And then we get the guys to give us a very rough estimate of what we think it's going to take, and they give us another number. We divide that one by that one, and we end up with a number. And these numbers are all bigger or smaller than each other. So when you start having these arguments about, no, that one has to happen, that one has to happen, well, take the passion out, let's look at the numbers. You know, it says that one is a less business value than that one. Are you saying that the numbers are wrong? Are you saying you haven't had the conversations with your peers to make sure that you agree where is time critical, where is the risk, where is the business value? And you know what? If people can't, if everything's number one, then nothing's number one. What you're doing is all that power is going down to the guys at the bottom. You're basically saying, you guys decide for yourselves. I'm not going to give you any direction. You decide to interrupt your work for this thing or that thing. Leadership's about providing those conditions. So, dead simply, 3 pieces of work. All these hippos have come in and said they're all number one, top priority. So we just decide ourselves based on the shortest job. The top one, we deliver some value after month 1. If you notice, if you're smart, that they both finish at the same time. So they're all delivered at the same time. Like, you still get 3 pieces of work in 7 months. But the cost of delay doing this is massive. We've reduced it there. And why? For customers, we're only here. We don't come to work to do Agile. We do Agile like for the benefit of our customers. We're delivering value to our customers earlier. So yeah, work your shortest job first. I think it's a very, very useful tool. Decide from the top what's important, set clear direction, then trust people to help you get there. Right. All of this stuff, you're still with us? How many slides? 23 minutes? Oh, we're actually doing quite well. Thanks for sticking with us. So, preference for the shorter time scale. This was mentioned in a couple of talks earlier on, where you have the small batch size. And if you look at this, I mean, this is basically, somebody mentioned the evil word of waterfall earlier on, so it's probably worth saying that this is probably what that's all about, isn't it? We used to develop software with masses of requirements documents, give them to a development team. 6 months later, you'd get something for test, and eventually you get in front of the customer and they've changed their mind, or they went out of business, or you didn't understand when they said pink, they meant slightly off red or something. And then we moved to Agile and everything was fine, right? Nothing was ever late. We got everything right. But why did people want that waterfall kind of model? you know, the Gantt charts and the spreadsheets, it was to give them this kind of idea of there's no chaos out there. I've got some predictability. I can believe in this plan. It's in a spreadsheet. It must be true. This kind of illusion of control. And why? Because we're part of a system. You know, Agile can very easily fall into mañana, it's ready when it's ready, right? You know, don't tell me what to do. I'm self-organizing. Working software over documentation, chaos, blah, blah. It's not. It's just a tool to get value out and de-risk that value. And we, the managers, you know, we're part of a system. We've got peers throughout the organization, stakeholders in sales and marketing and customer services. They've got relationships they have to manage. You know, we are kind of a client of theirs. So yeah, people like predictability. One of the best things that we do in that PI planning, like Melisa was saying, the big room planning, we're only really thinking 3 months ahead. So hopefully short term is fairly stable. You know, things can change. You know, Alan might go and buy another company or something like that and all plans are off. But, you know, hopefully in the next 3 months, we've got a good idea of the priorities. We can try and create a plan. And the better we can get at being predictable, the more trust we get in those stakeholders, the better the relationships, the better the collaboration. Off we go. So how do we measure predictability? Well, we just try and measure as much stuff as we can. And this is where I massively rely on Melisa and her organisation, the Scrum Masters. We measure whatever we can. Cycle time, WIP, I'm sure you all know these kind of things. But keeping an eye on which teams have got a problem with their cycle time. You know, why do they have a problem with their cycle time? Is it the components they're working on? Do we need engineering help? Is it skills gaps in the team? Is it the amount of rework? Well, where's the rework coming from? Measure as much as you can. Really think of a system. You know, system thinking, lean thinking. You know, if it takes a day to code something and 2 weeks to get in production and people want to go faster, you know, do you try and make the guys work harder and sleep quicker and stuff? Or do you work on the queues, you know, that transaction cost? That's where we as the managers can really get involved. Try and find those blockages, those gaps in the system, those queues, and go and try and address those. And we think this is, you know, it's not software. It could be anywhere. You know, as a manager, work in progress. Try and reduce the amount of things that are going through this system. It just help people deliver. You know, focus on what's important. Okay, I think that'll do for that one. Adaptability, is that you?
So originally I called this one flexibility, and I was going to do some conference yoga, but Brigitte stole my thunder. So we're going to call it adaptability, and it's about welcoming changing requirements. And to me, this is about, it's so important that organisations have the ability to absorb change. We have a strategy, a long-term vision, but the markets and our competitive landscape will change frequently, and sometimes that means that we have to adapt course. So as leaders, I think it's really important that we're focusing on creating processes at a higher level that just naturally absorb that change. Have a look at this. Thing of beauty. Every detail of this project is described. It's all scheduled, the dependencies are highlighted, the people are allocated, the timescale is visualized. The project is costed and the budget's secured already. If only the real world could read a Gantt chart. So what we're doing with building software is we're solving challenging problems, and that means that we're going to uncover complexity as we go. And when that happens, we need to adjust. And when we need to adjust a plan like this, it means shifting right. And when we shift things right, we then have to start asking questions such as, is the person who is allocated to that task still available, or is their name on some other Gantt chart in some other department? And when we shift right, the duration of the project increases, which means the project cost has increased, which may mean we need to go back and try and secure more budget. And all of this is difficult and costly and pretty inefficient in the context of building software. So one of the things we use to try and absorb this change is another idea that comes from the SAFE framework. We don't fund projects. We fund collections of teams. We call them release trains. And these are long-standing groups of people who are focused either on part of the product or maybe on a value stream, delivering value to a customer. And they're funded based on the cost of those people, not what they're working on. So once again, we have this prioritized list that feeds into our release train, and we absorb change by changing the order of the things on the list, so what the work is that we're going to pick up next. And because we're using these small batches, that turnaround time, that time to pivot is pretty quick. So what happens when we overrun? Which we will. This model gives us the opportunity to stop and ask, is this still the most important thing to be working on? And if it is, we already have the people and the budget in place to continue. So all leaders need to embrace these models to absorb change in the organisation. And sometimes that means training the leaders to change their mindset and let go of the Gantt charts. So sustainability, maintaining a constant pace indefinitely. You've all heard the phrase burnout. It's prevalent in many organisations, and it has a significant effect on health, happiness, productivity, stuff that leaders should care about. So as leaders, we need to know the signs of burnout and be really vigilant for those signs in our people. And there are many ways that we as leaders can help maintain a constant pace. I'm just going to talk about 3. So the first is WIP. As leaders, we're frequently under pressure to get our teams to do more, work harder, build faster. And the market has expectations of our companies to be always pushing the boundaries or get the next big idea out. But we need to balance this with the needs of our people and the essential role of protecting their well-being. So you're all probably familiar with WIP limits within the context of a team. But as leaders, we need to be thinking at a higher level as well, thinking in terms of the team of teams. How many projects are going through our departments at one time? And do we have support teams or roles that are also having to be involved in all of these projects all at the same time? And we also need to consider other distractions. Are there corporate systems that are being changed, things like travel and expenses? It all takes a cognitive load for our people to learn and adapt to these new ways of working. And we have to recognise that this has an effect on productivity. So at every level, the leadership team need to be focusing on limiting WIP. The second one is slow down to go faster. To maintain a sustainable pace, we need the ability to absorb change without derailing our plans. And as James was saying earlier, we can take a systems view to measure things, measure the interrupts. What are the causes? How can we address them? And also by slowing down, we can avoid adding to our tech debt, possibly even start paying some of it off. But achieving all of this requires slack. You wouldn't run a factory machine at 100% capacity 24/7 and expect it just to keep going, and we shouldn't expect the same of our people. So people need time to breathe and think and be creative, and room for innovation is essential for continuous improvement. So by providing slack in the system, we not only reduce burnout and improve flow, but we force that sustainable pace. And finally, I think we should talk about fun. As leaders, it's really easy to get caught up in reports and productivity, but by focusing on fun, we can find opportunities for people to celebrate their work. Imagine you wake up in the morning and think about the day ahead. You've got 15 tasks you need to get done, you're only going to be able to do 5. Your colleagues are in the same position, so they're no help. And none of your team have had any leave in about 3 months because your project is so important and that deadline is looming. How do you feel? Do you feel energized, excited? Now imagine you wake up in the morning and think, I've got 6 tasks, I can definitely do 5. And that 6th one is a bit tricky, but I know James has worked on something similar before. And our team values pairing, so I know he's going to help. And later today, we're going to join a systems demo where all the teams celebrate the work they achieved in the last sprint. And everyone's going to love my presentation, especially the spinning unicorn head. So I know if that was my work day, I would bounce out of bed really keen to get my 7 tasks done so I could enjoy the party. As leaders, we can't enforce fun, but we can encourage people to enjoy what they do. And part of that is creating a sustainable work pace, so people are not overwhelmed.
Okay, I like this one because it mentions the customer. Like I say, we're not here to do Agile, we're here to maximise the benefit of our customers. Agile, we just think is the best way of delivering working software. And I think we can all agree, hopefully, we're all part of the same organisation, but how many of our organisations are really built around benefit of the customer? We talk about these hierarchical organisations and these subdivisions, these hippos, these different execs with their own competing targets. That's not really a world where we've put the customer first. I think we do have to think probably, SAFE kind of does challenge us, these value streams, to think from the top down, what is important, what are the directives, what are the objectives, how do we make those a value stream, and how do we deliver that value for the customer? And organise people around, the marketing guys, the sales guys, the developers, the engineers, getting the right people together to deliver that value. So we're not competing separate silos, we're all part of the same business. I think the other thing that's interesting for me, particularly in software, is that a lot of our customers are internal. And we as the managers, we've got to find those networks internally. You know, who are our end users? And as a manager, just as a people person in general, are you helpful? You know, do you think you're helpful? Do other people think you're helpful? It's quite interesting on that one. I think I'm helpful, but perhaps I only help some people, the ones that I like, I don't know. And your people, you know, are they open-minded? These behaviours that Melisa's mentioned around, do they help people? You know, so yeah, customers, it's quite important. How are we doing for time? 10 minutes, I've got the warning. We better crack on. I'll jump into this one. I changed the name of this one, by the way, to diligence. I didn't like the word we had. Continuous attention to technical excellence. Tech debt. I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier on. It's one of my big bugbears with these sales guys with their flash cars. Yes, I wouldn't want to be a sales guy, and they've got targets and stuff, and if they don't meet the targets a few times in a row. But you know, they miss a target and it just resets to zero. You know, the end of the month, the end of the quarter, the end of the year. Wow. We don't have that luxury. Every bad decision we've made, every piece of technology that's gone out of date, every box that needs patching, we try to win that deal by cutting a corner. You promised us we'd get time to go back and fix it, and we didn't. This is technical debt. You know, it's a real thing. We've got to keep an eye on it. We as the managers have got to try and find a way of getting the business to value their investment in attention to detail, to trusting the guys who are so close to the work when they tell us the stuff that we don't hear. This project is going to take a long time. We can't do that unless we fix that. So finding that space, you know, to trust people and value that technical work. And one of the other behaviours actually Stan Beecham mentioned is this idea of a conscientious workforce. And I think this falls into that category, really. You know, if we can focus on the right behaviours, the open-minded behaviour, the ability to disagree, to put your hand up and say, there's a problem here, this is not a great idea. You know, create that world of honesty, you know, radical honesty, he said, which I love because you can say anything to anyone. Can I be radically honest? I don't like your t-shirt, you know, whatever. It works really well. In SAFE, we've got this kind of concept of the technical enablers, and I think that's part of it as well. It takes collaboration to work with the business, to work with those PMs. Where are you going? Where do you want to get to? Let me build that roadmap ahead of you. You know, I can build today the stuff that you're going to need in the future. So yeah, be mindful, be conscientious about, you know, who you're building this stuff for, who your customer is, what their requirements are, the PMs, you know, who's the end user. Line of sight, strategy, it's all the same themes coming around all the time. This is our role as the leaders. It also means kind of valuing that upfront investment. You know, if you're going to try something, you've never done it before, you don't know how long it's going to take. So create that learning environment where people can experiment, they can try things. Oops, 5 minutes, I'll move on. Right, we might be there, you know. Oh, reflection, can you do this one in 2?
Yeah, I can do it in 2. So this is about teams retrospecting. And it's a really important tenet of agility. It's at the core of continuous improvement. So we need to embrace this culture that values from the learnings we gain from failure. If our people are afraid to fail, they'll only ever make safe decisions, and we will only ever achieve mediocrity at best. So aiming high and failing fast is something that we aim to promote. And when things go wrong, which they will, we perform root cause analysis, not to allocate blame, but to look at where the systems have failed us and what we can improve so we're better next time. But as leaders, we're always being asked to look forward. What's the next challenge or opportunity on the horizon, and how can we best prepare for it? But how often do we stop and look back? Is what we're doing working? How can we improve it? Are we still aligned with the company's strategy? Do our people know what success looks like? We don't want to continue doing the same things in the same way. So while improvement is essential, change is really hard. And that's why we adopt incremental improvements. The improvement charter, which is described here, is a great tool. It just helps with that approach. The idea is that you have a long-term vision for the change that you want to adopt. It's kind of a North Star. You start off by measuring where you are, and you then decide what your next step or milestone on that journey might be. And then you experiment by making small changes with limited impact. You measure again and repeat. And another advantage of this is it allows people to get on board with this change process. Our people can see the vision for the change, the reason for the change, where they're going. but they can also be involved in the journey, involved in the process of achieving it. So Big Bang change is unsettling for everyone. And it assumes that that vision for change is correct. But if Agile teaches us anything, it teaches us not to solve all the problems up front, but to learn on the way through frequent reflection and feedback loops. Is that 2 minutes?
I found it was pretty good, well done. This might be the last one, well done. So we put this one to the end because, let's face it, this is what we're here for. Working software, primary measure of progress. And, we're talking about managers and leaders. So what are we measuring? If we're not measuring working software, why do we spend all our time on CapEx reports and spreadsheets and all the rest of it? It's working software. How do you even measure working software? Is it checking how many lines of code there are or something? And is it value to the customer? Is it NPS? Is it churn? How do we measure success? And what do we value? Yeah, we value the results, the outcomes, but we really, really value the behaviours that are going to lead to those results. And I think that's the big jump that we've got to take in management and leadership. Providing the conditions, providing the template for how people should be behaving, give them a mission and let them get on with it. So I'm going to leave you with 3 thoughts because we're down to the big red number now. Hang on. Oh yeah, I did this last night. Those 12 Agile, 20 years ago these were written. I think they stood up pretty well. Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons in there. I think they're still quite provocative. We can read into these things, and I think that does provide a bit of guidance, and I don't think they are absolutely pertinent to development. Business agility is something we all want. We all want to pivot, try something and move on. So I think they've done pretty well. Okay, so I'm going to now leave you with 3 thoughts. I didn't get time to do the kind of animation bit, but thought number 1, the world is changing, work's changing. The people that are going to be building and populating the companies of the future are a different breed of people. Managers have to change as well. We have to change the way they're leading, probably create conditions for managing for creativity instead of productivity. I think it's a big challenge for us. I think Agile promotes all of the behaviours that we want, and it's really great for our teams. I think our challenge as Agile leaders is to now infest the rest of the business with the same cultures. Take this Agile principle outside of the techie room with all the geeks with the glasses and computers and stuff, and make this part of the whole business, how we all behave and interact with each other. And that's going to take a bit of transformation, kind of behavioural transformation. Yes, we absolutely value results. We also value behaviours. But if we can focus on behaviours, you'll probably get the results you're looking for. And that's going to take change from the top. We have to provide that clear leadership, the clear objectives, the clear direction. And then if we've got people with the right behaviours, we can trust them to help us get there and solve the stuff that we want to solve. So I think we're out of time, and I think we're out of slides, so we're finished.